Prayer is a powerful tool that brings strength, peace, and results. It is the most powerful form of communication between man and God. However, there may be times when you feel like your prayers aren't getting answered, leaving you feeling frustrated and heartbroken. In today's video, we will be looking at 7 reasons why your prayers fail to work sometimes. So, without further ado, let's get started. Number 1. Walking in disobedience. This might come as a surprise, but sometimes God can withhold answered prayers until you have obeyed the previous instructions He gave you to do. For example, let's say you wanted to move to a new country to start a business, but God had specifically asked you not to. He instead told you to stay in your home country to start off that business, but then you decided to go against God and travel. You will indeed arrive safely, but no matter how much you do in that new country, there is a very high likelihood you will not prosper. This is because you are outside of God's instructions. Or let's say you're desperately seeking a new job and you've been applying but getting rejected. But deep down, you know that God had instructed you previously to make peace with your former boss for the wrong things you said to him. However, out of ego and pride, you chose to brush it off, thinking it's a minor issue. Here's the thing. God will not release that new job until you humble yourself and do what He had originally asked you to. You might keep turning around or trying to avoid it, but as long as you keep failing to do the previous instructions He gave you, you might not be ready for the new job He has in store for you. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why many people have unanswered prayers. They are very much aware of God's original instructions He gave them, but they disobey and are hoping that God will change His mind. I'm sorry to say it doesn't work that way. If you fail to walk in the instructions God has given to you, you will end up only going in circles and delaying yourself. God doesn't make mistakes. When He gave you the original instructions, that was because He already knew that was the perfect path for you to follow. But since you disobeyed, you will either have to manage your situation or revert back to the original plan He had. Number 2. Pride. Another major factor that can hinder your prayers from reaching God's ears is pride. You see, God never turns away people except those who are full of themselves. Sometimes when you approach God with a sense of entitlement and begin yelling at Him, you might find yourself crossing boundaries you shouldn't. For example, sometimes people pray asking God to prove Himself if He is God, or asking Him questions such as, "Are you still on the throne?" This attitude of demanding proof from the Almighty is often rooted in pride. When you come before God, remember your limitations as a human being. God is too big to prove Himself to you. He has honestly gone past the level of trying to prove Himself to man. And you know what? In fact, most times you approach God with pride, and He might not even punish you. What He might simply choose to do is to ignore you. In fact, He might ignore the very problems you brought to Him, and instead choose to solve those same problems in somebody else's life. This will be an indirect form of punishment for your pride, because the Bible tells us God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Number 3. The wrong motives. One of the reasons why God sometimes doesn't answer your prayers is because of wrong motives. It's important to understand that God is not solely concerned with what you are asking for, but rather why you are asking for it. For example, if you were to ask God for wealth, but with the intention of showing off and seeking validation from others, He may not grant that request. You see, God looks beyond the surface and examines the true motives of your heart. In James 4 verse 3, the Bible reminds us, "When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." This verse highlights the importance of aligning our desires with God's will. If your motives are driven by selfishness, envy, or greed, it is unlikely that God will answer your prayers in the way you desire. Let's take another example. If you were to pray for someone else's husband to leave their wife for you, God would not grant that request. Why? Because He knows that the prayers will disrupt the marriage of someone else. God values righteousness, faithfulness, and the sanctity of relationships. Therefore, He will never compromise His standards no matter how desperate you are. Number 4. For experience purposes. Sometimes God might choose to allow you to experience certain challenges and trials in order to teach you something. By not answering your prayers instantly, God might be trying to teach you how to be patient. He might know you have a weakness in the area of impatience, and you always want things done your way instantly. As the Bible says in James 1 verse 3, "For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow." When God doesn't answer our prayers immediately, It invites us to seek His guidance, asking Him to reveal any areas in our lives that need refining. Number 5. You only pray when things go wrong. One of the reasons why God sometimes doesn't answer your prayers is because of the way you approach prayer. Many of us tend to reserve prayer for times of crisis or when we desperately need something. We view it as an emergency button to push when things go wrong. However, prayer should not be limited to problem-solving alone. Imagine if we only reached out to our loved ones when we needed their help or when we found ourselves in trouble. How would that make them feel? Prayer is no different. It's about constant communication, not just in times of desperation, but also in times of joy and thanksgiving. Just as the saying goes, prevention is better than cure, the same principle applies to prayers. Waiting until things go wrong before we start praying sets us up for a cycle of constantly needing to reverse the mess we find ourselves in. Instead, we should cultivate a habit of praying consistently, not just when we need something, but also when things are going well. By maintaining an ongoing conversation with God, even in times of abundance, we strengthen our relationship with Him. Number 6. You are praying according to your will. There are moments in our lives when we wonder why God seems silent. One possible reason for this is that we may be praying according to our own will, rather than aligning ourselves with God's divine plan. We can become so consumed by our own agenda that we try to manipulate and force our will to become God's will. However, the beauty of a relationship with God lies in surrendering our own will and aligning ourselves with His perfect purpose for our lives. In the Bible, we are reminded in Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. This verse encourages us to trust in God's wisdom and guidance, even when our own understanding falls short. It reminds us that our prayers should be in alignment with God's will, not our own limited perspective. When we surrender our will and align ourselves with God's divine plan, we open the door for His blessings to flow into our lives. It is in these moments of surrender that our prayers become more effective and our relationship with God deepens. Number 7. You are immature. The answer to why God might not give you what you want is sometimes simple. It is because He knows that you are not yet mature to handle what you are asking for. You see, God knows exactly what you are capable of handling. Just like a wise parent who withholds a certain privilege from their child until they are ready to handle it responsibly, God does the same with us. During your journey, God teaches you patience and the importance of maturity. He is also teaching you that getting what you want isn't always the same as getting what you need. God provides us with what we need to further our growth in Him, and often that doesn't involve receiving the situation or circumstance we may desire. For example, imagine that you want to start a ministry that impacts lives, but at the beginning, only a small number of people seem to be interested. You might feel discouraged, thinking that God isn't listening to your prayers. However, it's possible that God knows you're not yet ready to handle the challenges that come with leading a large and influential ministry. He wants to develop your character, strengthen your faith, and equip you with the necessary skills before exposing you to a larger crowd. So next time you find yourself wondering why your prayers aren't being answered, take a moment to reflect on your level of maturity. Ask yourself if there are areas in your life where you still need to grow and develop. Trust that God has a perfect plan for you and that He is working behind the scenes, preparing you for the blessings He has in store. So there you have it. Thank you for watching. If you love our videos, please feel free to subscribe to our channel.